in this section I'm going to get into, in the last section we covered how to get your Raspberry Pi set up and to be able to SSH and to do a WinSCP into the Raspberry Pi. Okay, basically this is what we're going to do. Go through some of the Docker basics, install, test, and the tools that we need. Alright, Docker is a container management system, so what it allows you to do is with a command line and a client you actually can create containers with different services in it, and then that obviously can pull from Docker Hub, which is a registry, and that allows you to on the fly create machines that have, what we'll do is have a number of services: MQTT, Node-RED, Grafana, InfluxDB. These are some of the Docker command lines that you can run. So for instance, you can actually create containers, you can pull them from a repository, stop them. Okay, here's some of the documentation for Docker. If you look on their website, I'll show a bit of a video of some of what their site looks like. Okay, this is now effective. What I showed you in the slides is installing the Docker. This is the actual website of Docker. You can actually see here, this is actually the Docker part. There's guides, product manuals, references, all kinds of stuff to get you going on Docker. This is the link that I included in the bottom for the cheat sheet. This is Docker Labs. You can see pretty much this is some of the commands that you're able to use. So very, very powerful, truly amazing piece of software. And then of course this is Docker Hubs. So you'll see here you can actually search for different containers that you need. You'll see what it does. It gives you the documentation on for instance, say Portainer. Alright, and then I have included a link to this, how to install Docker on a Raspberry Pi. These are some of the commands that I had, you know what I mean? So this gives a more detailed, goes into images and all kinds of stuff, so it's worth a look. Then here's another one. This is a Medium article. This is more about containers in general. How they actually work, the difference between virtual machines and containers, running it on Macs, Windows, Ubuntu. So again, worth a look. These are the commands, the step-by-step commands you need to do to get Docker to run on the Raspberry Pi. So you would do a sudo apt update to get the latest, get a shell script from getdocker.com, run the shell script, then which basically does all the hard work. You then have to set up permissions for the Docker user. You have to get the Docker Compose, which is a Python tool, and then do a reboot. And then when you get back, you will have Docker installed. Okay, what we plan on doing over the next few sections is to install these services. In this section, we'll just cover installing Docker and getting Portainer up and running. Portainer allows you to have a graphical user interface of actually what is going on inside the container. Docker and Portainer work very well together. So you normally would have to use the command line, which is very powerful and what most of the time what you can do. But Portainer gives you a graphical user interface that has a web interface that you can actually then have a look into all the details. Okay, this is now, I'll show a video of actually you need to copy this Docker compiled file using WinSCP across onto the Raspberry Pi. You will then run this Docker Compose up, and what that does, if you look at the Compose file, all it really is a YAML file, and so it has a number of services. The first one we're covering now on step 1 is Portainer. So you can see this is its name, this is the image file that it pulls from Docker Hub. You have some rules as to whether you start and stop it, what must happen. This is the port that gets exposed. So you would go to your Raspberry Pi, you go 192.168. whatever the IP is, and then $9000 is the port, and you will then get a web interface, which I'll show later. These are the volumes. So what this does is it stores information in your Raspberry Pi, so that the next time the container runs, it knows, what all the, all the settings that get stored in this volume. Okay, so once you have copied the Docker Compose file over onto the Raspberry Pi, you would go into the directory, run Docker Compose up, and that would effectively cause the container to be created, and it will pull down the image, it will create the container, and it will run. And you will see here it is being exposed on port 9000. This is what the dashboard looks like on port 9000. If you type this in, you will then get this dashboard. The first time you run the container, it will ask you to create a username and a password, but once you've done that once, you won't have to do it again, because it'll save it in that volume. So this gives you a quick summary of what goes on. You can see how many stacks you have, how many images. This is the image that it pulled down, and then it created a container. As we go through the next sections, we'll create a container for MQTT, one for Node-RED, one for InfluxDB, and one for Grafana. And you will see then each one of these, you'll be able to look at the details in the containers here. Okay, so and then you actually have a number of icons here that you can click to actually, in the video I'll show you how you actually can get information about the container. Alright, so what we're going to show here is this is WinSCP running. You can actually see once you've set it up and you've actually now effectively logged into your Raspberry Pi, you will have a window on the left here, which is your C drive or your D drive or your Windows machine, and then this would be your Pi. So you can see here is home, Pi, and then I've copied that Docker directory across. All that's inside of it is one Docker Compose YAML file. In the downloads you'll find this information. So once you've got that done, you would then go to your Raspberry Pi. You would change into that directory. So if we just go back to the original directory. If we do an ls, you'll see there's the directory now. If we change into that directory and we do an ls, you'll see there's just the Docker Compose YAML file. Once we've got that, it's actually as easy as doing Docker Compose and then up, which tells it now to bring that container up. Once you do that, you'll see, obviously you need to be connected to the internet. You'll see what it's doing here is it's pulling that Portainer from the Docker Hub. You can see there it pulls it, downloads it. Once it downloads it, it extracts it. And this all happens again from one line. And now it's creating the Portainer, and it'll take, you'll see there it's up and running now. So it actually shows you here now it's running on port 9000. Went across to 9000. You would see it would open up this window now, where automatically the user is admin. It wants now because it's creating a new container, it will ask you this once. So you would give it a password and another. It checks the password matches. So this green here says that the password matches, and it must be at least 8 characters long. When you say OK, it now says it's now ready to go. What you'd want now is to go to local and then connect. And the moment you do that, that's what I showed you in the slide. You now have the actual, you actually now have the dashboard now. So the main thing showing you this is your container. And then if you click into this now, it'll bring you to the dashboard. And in the dashboard, as I showed you in the slides, you can see one image, one stack, one container. And if you click into the container, you will actually see now that's running on port 9000. And as you can see over here, if I look at the logs, you can actually see the logs here of the actual container. If you go back and you do info, it now gives you a lot of detail as well about where all the directories inside the container. You must remember this is a Linux container, and so you look at the directories. It's var, lib, docker containers, and then the next one here will show you a graph which updates every 5 seconds, showing you basically your process ID, how long it's been up for. You can actually see real statistics on what's actually happening in memory, the CPU usage and whatever. So that's very powerful. And lastly, I put a link here to Docker Labs. They actually have a lot of a GitHub repository with a lot of different tools and stuff that you can then learn more about Docker and Docker Compose and how to create your own Docker containers. Okay, well, I think that's that for this section. In the next section, I will cover the Mosquito, which is an MQTT broker.